And so it is Christmas Eve 2021. We have come to the end of one of the worst years in the history of our country, and most definitely the worst year since we gained our democracy with the elections on the 27th of April 1994. 2021 was truly an annus horribilis. A year during which our beloved liberation movement, the African National Congress, literally came on the verge of destruction. Where the leadership of the African National Congress, in the person of President Cyril Ramaphosa and the Board National Executive Committee that came into power at Nasrec at the 54th National Conference in 2017 on the back of more than R1 million that had been paid by white monopoly capital to take over the African National Congress, finally started to execute their destruction of the African National Congress. For the first time since 1994, the ANC had been reduced to a minority party during the 1st of November local government elections. We have seen in this year how the population of South Africa have sadly lost their trust in the African National Congress. But more specifically, how they lost their trust in the leadership of the ANC. Because the manner in which they voted in the local government elections indicated that there's still a huge love and outreach to the African National Congress as an organization. But the leadership are rejected. Therefore, a very large part of the registered voters in South Africa decided to register their opposition to the manner in which the African National Congress is being run by abstaining from the polling booths. The current local government that had been elected in the 1st of November elections lacks credibility and lacks legitimacy. The consequence of all of this can be directly traced to the failed leadership of the current National Executive and President of the African National Congress. So why am I talking about all of this on Christmas Eve and a few days before New Year, and the new year indeed that will bring momentous decisions for the ANC and for our country? Because this is also the year during which the next national elective conference of the ANC has to take place. I talk about this because our people had suffered enough. Because the depths of deprivation, exploitation, the growing poverty gap between rich and poor, the arrogance of a small elite who only care for themselves and how to fill their own pockets, has reached a point where it certainly cannot be allowed to continue in the coming year. Just within the African National Congress, what the ANC leadership and senior management had done to their own staff, not having paid them for a period of 5 months, allowing that staff contingent to suffer immensely together with their families and their children, people to lose their homes, their cars, all their savings, seeing their credit records being trashed. All of this because of a dismal failure of leadership and self-absorbed arrogance. Now, towards the end of the year and the last few weeks, the African National Congress management wants to make it a virtue that they started paying some of their arrears salaries. They go to the media and say, we've paid October, we've paid September. But what about November and what about December? So you want to be praised for doing what you were contractually expected to do, for not having done what you were supposed to do. You do not want to be wrapped over the knuckles, so to speak. For having stolen UIF and pay-as-you-earn money for a period since 2018, you do not want any consequences. You get angry when some staff members decide to lay criminal charges of theft, fraud, and corruption. I personally had to face that anger. I was abruptly, within 4 hours from the first advice and letter that I was to be fired by an arrogant ANC management and leadership that do not even care about the labor legislation that it, as Liberation Party itself, has passed in Parliament. So you want to be praised for doing what you were supposed to do, and then you even fail to fully execute what you have to do. Now, personally, I've had enough. I've had enough, together with many other ANC comrades, of a leadership who have shown us that they are incapable of leading, that they made sure that they got into power as members of the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress for no other purpose but to enrich themselves and to advance their own personal agendas. And those agendas overlap with the intention of white monopoly capital to continue to control our economy and to continue to exploit our people. So the time had come, unequivocally and without any apology, to say that Cyril Ramaphosa and this National Executive Committee of the African National Congress must go. And they must go as quickly, as soon as possible. In fact, we should not have to wait until the 55th National Conference of the ANC, which is due in December 2022. We should be able to call a special national elective conference as soon as possible in the new year and get rid of them. Vote them out and elect a leadership that is committed to serve the people of our country, to return the African National Congress to being a pro-poor party that cares for the majority of poor Black and especially African people, and that will make sure that the policies that were adopted at the 54th National Conference for radical economic transformation, the expropriation of land without compensation through a clear and deliberate nationalization program, not the farce that the ANC tried to dish up to us as land reform and expropriation, which was so deliberately presented in Parliament in a manner that it would fail. Making sure that our financial institutions will be transformed so that they will be serving our people that our state-owned enterprises will be strengthened, not privatized, and will be placed in the service of the empowerment of the majority of our people. To that purpose, I personally have committed myself in the new year to fight without any holding back, tooth and nail, against this current leadership that is destroying the African National Congress. I've been asked last year, when I wanted to publish my follow-up autobiography following on the first installment of my autobiography that was published many years ago under the title Fighting for Hope, in fact first in Afrikaans, under the title De Veg vir Hoop. I was asked last year not to publish my follow-up autobiography because the fear was that it would damage some of the senior leadership of the African National Congress. Among them, some of those in the top 5, now top 5, because of course there was that farcical stepping aside process and then eventual suspension of Comrade Ace Magashule as the Secretary General of the African National Congress, because there was a fear that I would harm and perhaps even destroy some of their political careers. I then gave in because I was asked by a very good friend of mine who was pleading with me to give an opportunity to the leadership of the African National Congress to sort out their differences and try and work for unity, not to publish that tell-all autobiography. Well, now I've decided I will. A few chapters needs to be rewritten. Some more information needs to be added. I want to talk clearly and unequivocally about what happened in Alexandra with my dear friend and comrade Vincent Chabalala, who I helped to leave the country and go for military training. And when he came back after he had been trained in the GDR and in the Soviet Union, was led into a trap in Alex by a very close friend and very senior African National Congress politician. And hardly an hour after he had met that, I don't want to call him comrade, that person, Vincent was shot dead in a heroic firefight that he had with the South African police, security police, and the South African Defence Force. I'm going to mention names. I'm going to talk about how people have enriched themselves, how people have sold out, how in the instance of Vincent, people have managed not just to sell out, but to lead their own comrades into ambushes and get them killed. I'm going to talk about the kind of things that I've seen happening with white monopoly capitalists being day and night in engagement with President Nelson Mandela. I will talk about how I experienced President Cyril Ramaphosa as the Secretary General of the ANC and also as the chief self-appointed negotiator of the ANC during the CODESA negotiations that gave us this farcical so-called liberation and a constitution that places us in a straitjacket and prevents us from being able to totally transform our economy, to make the radical changes that are necessary, and to empower our people especially economically. I'm not going to mince my words about what the ANC had done to me during the last few months, when they used every bit of factional politics within the National Executive Committee of the ANC to suspend me first temporarily and illegally in terms of the ANC constitution, put me under severe pressure with a farcical summary dismissal without any regard for our labour legislation, refusing to engage in a sensible process of conciliation and arbitration in the CCMA, and finally leaving me now in this festive season without the monies that they owe me, with many months of non-payment of salary, even withholding months of salary payments that are due to me when other comrades are finally paid. I'm going to call a spade a spade. I give notice in this message, this Christmas and New Year's message, that if anyone thought I was prepared to take on sellouts in the past year, they will see a much more determined Carl Niehaus, more prepared to speak out, more prepared to fight to the very hilt. I and many others have dedicated our lives to the liberation of this country. We have dedicated our lives to the African National Congress as the preeminent liberation movement in South Africa. I personally have served, together with the long detention period that I served and the severe torture that I experienced there, 10 years in the prisons of apartheid South Africa. I've suffered severely. I've seen some of my comrades, among them David Webster and many others, as I've mentioned also Vincent Tshabalala, killed by the apartheid regime, and sometimes killed also through the complicity of so-called comrades in the ANC with the apartheid regime. As I've said, I've dedicated my life to our liberation and to the African National Congress. I've got no intention whatsoever to see all that effort, all that suffering, my whole youth and the youth of so many of my fellow comrades, going to waste because of the arrogance and the selling out of people who call themselves comrades, but who show no respect and no regard for the majority of Black, poor, and African South Africans. In this coming new year, a luta continua is going to be the operative phrase. My book, I think aptly titled Beyond the Pale, will be published towards the end of next year. A month or so before our next national elective conference is due. I can publish it earlier. As I've indicated, it is almost ready. I just have to rework a couple of chapters and add some more information, hopefully some more dynamite that will blow up the arrogance, the posturing, and the betrayal of some of those who are now in leadership. But I'm going to deliberately time the publication of that book to hit out at those who've betrayed us in the hardest possible way. But as this message conveys, there will be no filters. There will be no holding back. There will be a 100% commitment to liberate the African National Congress from those who now has it in their sweaty hands, those who are now betraying us and are enriching themselves. In conclusion, I want to wish all my comrades, my true comrades, those who've dedicated their lives to the liberation struggle, those who truly care about the future of our country and the true revolutionary task of the African National Congress, to have a good Christmas and New Year. I know many of you have suffered financially and emotionally and physically severely during the past year. Try and get some well-deserved rest. Try and recharge your batteries. Next year is going to be a very, very hard fight. We dare not fail. We have to succeed. For the sake of ourselves, for the sake of our beloved liberation movement, and especially for the sake of the people of our country.